I think spirituality was in the topic list, but it wasn't something that I had really understood or grasped as something that I could relate to. It was something to be studied or to be, I don't know, that didn't belong in my culture. And so when I came back home, I realized that I had been asking these young women about their ancestry and their grandparents and their cultures, and I didn't even know my roots. The Athabasca River in Canada, which is the river that goes through the tar sands, one of the ways that we get petrol. It is it is one of the extraction sites that we can see from space. So it's just horrendous, the impact that it's having on, polluting water systems and land and contamination and everything. There is this time where I wanted to go record the river, so I met someone to go on a little road trip with in Edmonton, and we drove together and found this. I checked on the map and found this spot where we could park nearby and walk to the river, and so we did. And just as we were walking back, I saw these iridescent colors on a little puddle next to the river, and I asked him, like, oh, don't you think that's oil? And sure enough, we spotted, so we went up a bit and we saw just like a little bit of a pipeline just going out of the ground in a grid kind of thing. And yeah, he was a local Indigenous man, so we had a little moment of, well, I asked him, like, oh, could we pray around that little puddle and that water, and which is also a practice I'm learning to reclaim for myself, not having grown up with any religion or much kind of spiritual understanding, and again being very, very inspired by Indigenous peoples and some of their traditional ways of being in connection with the rest of the living world and all the magical unseen things that go beyond our rational and logic Cartesian ways that we grew up and we were raised in this Western culture. So yeah, and so I think it brings me back to that moment of tenderness and care and seeing the might of the river and how how insidious the contamination and the pollution is, really.
I find it interesting to hear a bit like about the spiritual growth, how that happens, especially since you mentioned that you didn't really grow up with a religion or things like that. And it sounds like something that you're really learning also through your journeys now and through your works. Can you take us back maybe to when you started realizing that?
So the very first time I visited Canada was for this research project in anthropology and working on this topic of cultural revitalization and asking people lots of questions about their ancestry. And I think spirituality was in the topic list, but it wasn't something that I had really understood or grasped as something that I could relate to. It was something to be studied or to be, I don't know, that didn't belong in my culture. And so when I came back home, I realized that I had been asking these young women about their ancestry and their grandparents and their cultures, and I didn't even know my roots. I didn't know about my family. And so I think that was, for me, that was the door into that, because there was something around learning about the kind of people that I come from on both sides, on my mother and father's side. And I have a lot of my grandparents still alive at the time, which really helped with that. And I sound recorded all of them as well, which is very sweet. And then, so that was like one kind of like, I felt like at least I could see the door kind of thing, whereas before I didn't even know there was a door there. And then I think I found the key to the door, if you allow me that like very basic metaphor, when I moved to England. And there is I would say there is a strong revival for Celtic, pagan, sometimes that is quite strongly inspired by like the Victorian era, and because the Celts didn't write anything, they were old cultures, like we don't actually know much apart from archaeological records. But there was something around the practices of the seasonal festivals, which I think was the first thing that I could be like, oh, I can relate to that. Like I can relate to the solstice. I can see it with my eyes. I can feel it in my body, how the seasons and the cycles change and impact me and my people around me and the land. And then I met someone here locally who I consider as my mentor. And she's an amazing elder and so generous and so humble with her knowing and how she shares about her lifestyle and all of that. And she was one of the first people I met when I moved here. So it was almost like a kind of, what's that saying? Like the guide shows up when the student is ready or something like that. So it felt a
Yeah,
bit
yeah, yeah.
like I had so much curiosity for it, and then I had found the right land for me to learn about. Because I think, again, like spirituality can be very loose and it can be very unbounded. There's so many cultural traditions and spiritual traditions around the world, and yes, you can get quite passionate about them. And there is a much deeper learning that happens when you're bound to a place where you can practice and learn from and learn the plants and learn the rhythm and all of that.
Yeah, to become part of that like ecosystem, also culturally, that's around the place then.
Exactly. Yeah.